if I start telling people about hell, I might just scare them off. Where are you going to scare them off to? Hell number 2? Or are you just going to sit there and let them burn?
This subject is darker than people think. And maybe people don't I understand that this is such a reality and it's been going on for so long in the underground or in rural communities. And sometimes we find municipalities also wrapped up in some of this. You want to speak about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you're just kind of asking about how this goes on in the underground, even in like local areas and stuff. Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yeah, and how some of the municipalities, the police, some of them are involved in some other aspects too. Go ahead.
Yeah, you'll find it's just, man, that's a broad question because it's a great question, but it's so, when you start really digging in, you start doing research on this topic. Like I'll just use myself as an example. Kind of has the same story. At first it sounds kind of crazy. It seems like it's too big of an idea to be true. Oftentimes, if people don't understand the why of something, they turn around, why would somebody be doing this is what people ask a lot, And if they don't understand the motive for what's being presented, a lot of times that deters people from actually looking into the subject. But what Tom and I have done, what people like Russ and Greg Reed and everybody else has done, is when we actually see evidence in some form or fashion with a case where we realize there's something, even if you're not a spiritual person, a lot of people will recognize that there's something of a spiritual nature happening behind the scenes. They'll see the evidence of, I guess because this involves law enforcement a lot, I guess that's kind of what I'm referring to, is there are lots of law enforcement guys that aren't religious or they don't have relationships with Christ, but yet they realize that this crime was rooted in a spiritual belief of some sort. They see something darker, behind the scenes. But a lot of people, even without being able to identify a motive, when you start doing the research, you'll see evidence. You'll see evidence of something actually having happened. So even if you can't contemplate a why, the evidence is there. And so there are some people that will see the evidence, even if they can't come up with a motive, and they'll start to explore it. And what you find with most stories is that the rabbit hole goes deep. I mean, endless stories of people we've dealt with personally that start to get involved doing research on a local case that involves sexual abuse or, a ritual murder of some sort. They found, identifiable, satanic marks on the body, or a ritual, site like an altar with in some cases you'll see what they call a power cone, made out of bones or human skulls, that are associated. It's in the backyard or something like that of somebody that committed a murder. But none of that ever gets reported, and that's what's so mind blowing when it comes to dealing with the the municipalities and the local things, is you have to dig deeper than the surface always, right? Mainly because it's not a crime. It's not a crime in the United States to be a Satanist. It's really not. And so, back in the 90s, in the early 90s, the satanic panic was coming to an end. You actually had some states that were changing their laws in regard to satanic crime. And the FBI actually put out a report, I think, in 1992. It was 1991 or 1992 by a guy named Special Agent Kenneth Landing. And he talked about the fact that it became a rule that the satanic components of a crime were not allowed to be brought up in the actual courtroom, because it's not a crime to be a Satanist. And so it would do justice a disservice if the jury was swayed by facts that weren't illegal, that pertained to somebody's belief system, but would maybe give an improper route to a motive. And so what we kind of saw was when the FBI started doing a lot of research in these cases, they ended up writing reports that they tried to discredit what was really happening. But even in this report that I referenced, Special Agent Kenneth Landing actually admits that there were tens of thousands of phone calls being made to the FBI every year that reported some form of satanic activity, including ritual murder. And what I found most interesting about that admission in the report was that he was admitting that tens of thousands of people were reporting it. So that to me seem to indicate the biggest amount of evidence for a phenomenon behind the scenes, because when you have tens of thousands of people that are unconnected, that are calling and reporting activity of a dark spiritual nature, always involving some sort of satanic component, something might be going on. Now, they came through, and the False Memory Syndrome Foundation was created to discredit a lot of the kids that were in the preschools and stuff that were abused. The system kind of turned on everybody and squashed the movement. And what we saw was law enforcement that was heavily involved in trying to bring awareness. Well, let me put it this way. Law enforcement was tracking the criminal aspect of these satanic crimes. They were chasing the actual murder. They were chasing the abuse. They were chasing the sexual abuse. They were chasing the actual crimes. But what they did not understand was that they were going up against those powers and principalities that we read about in Ephesians. And so without that spiritual covering, they were complete. As soon as they started tracking the evidence to military and political, roots, that is when they poked the bear. And what you saw was the unspoken rule stayed true. And that unspoken rule is that the government does not care what you know, they only care what you can prove. And when the law enforcement were actually gaining ground and gathering enough evidence to put some people away, you saw a very mighty hand come through and begin to dismantle that network with incredible ease. And to this day, there are not many people that are left. And we know one of them that was very heavily involved in the inner circle. His name is Greg Reed. He was actually in the film Detestable, and that man has done a lot of work as a private investigator and a consultant to law enforcement in specific area of ritual occult crime, more so than anybody else I've ever met in my life. And Greg saw this firsthand, the dismantling of the network. They actually had it was a multi-agency group. It spanned agencies, but they created a task force, and they had something inside called a CCIN newsletter, which allowed them to share information about cases very easily, and they worked together. And that network was dismantled within a year. And to this day, there are only, I think, talking to Greg, maybe 3 people that are still alive that were actually a part of that. I could have those numbers wrong if I do, forgive me, but not many. People were discredited. Some people started going kind of crazy. They really went off the deep end, chasing other rabbit holes. Other people, are dead now. Whether that was purposeful or just they died of natural causes, no one knows. But it was just utterly destroyed, and it's a perfect example of what happens when you go up against this kind of activity without any spiritual covering.
If you like our videos, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to get all our frequent updates.